Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 9th of September 2024. Sorry I'm a little bit late today, just life is catching up with me, struggle to get up. Not that I'm exhausted, but an exhausting weekend I think. Okay, we are looking at the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. 1,150 personnel lost is a fairly standard number. It's right in the middle of the high spread from 1,000 to 1,300. We have seen a few days of over 1,300 recently, so it's spiked upwards. The personnel losses today come down to kind of a scare quotes normal number. It's an insanely high number still, well over 1,000. Goodness me. Okay, 3 tanks, fairly low. 9 troop-carrying AFVs, fairly low. Both of those below the daily average. 26 artillery systems above the daily average, but lower than we have seen. 44 vehicles and fuel tanks and 2 pieces of special equipment. So not a huge set of losses for the Russians across these categories, but yeah, still it's going to hurt them. I do wonder how sustainable the losses they have been taking are and will continue to be, because there has to be at some point where they cannot keep throwing dozens and dozens of vehicles and combat assets at the Ukrainians every day and lose them. Indeed, when we look at Andrew Perpetual's loss list, not from today, not in the last 24 hours, but the one before, it's an insane list again. We had a couple of days of parity, maybe even the Ukrainians losing 1 or 2 more, but then what's often happening is that some units are stacking up their figures and then release a whole bunch together. So actually this is happening throughout those times of parity, and then you get a day like this where here you look at the civilian vehicles, that's not driven by civilians. Those are things like bukankas, loafs, as they're called, Scooby-Doo vans, SUVs, all those kinds of things. Just the huge number of those lost by the Russians. Combat asset losses are fairly high, looking to be about a 2-to-1 Russian to Ukrainian losses there. So this is from 2 days ago. Let's look at the Ukrainian losses. A couple of Starlinks, not too much concern for me. We have a Marder infantry fighting vehicle being captured. I haven't seen footage of that. Interesting. A number of APCs, all 5 destroyed or abandoned. A couple of Senators and Humvee, M113 and an old BTR. We have mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles. 50% abandoned, destroyed. 4 in total, 2 abandoned and destroyed, Kozak and Max Pro. And then we've got another Max Pro and a Kozak damage. So those are predominantly indigenously or entirely indigenously or Western provided vehicles. But nothing crazy there in that list for the Ukrainians. Now the Russians, it's just a game of statistics here, just huge numbers of Russian losses, and also worth noting that almost all of the losses were destroyed or abandoned in these combat asset losses. So we start with a radar, a 96L6 TSP radar. As a Gimlers, that was that one I think I showed you the other day and said it might be an old bit of footage, and it's a new bit of footage, but of an old hit. So the claim here is that came from February, but so it does appear to be new. That'll be a high value loss, although not recent. Engineering vehicle damage, couple of bits of artillery destroyed, a couple damage, and then we're on to just huge numbers of destroyed equipment, mainly infantry fighting vehicles, BTRs, BRMs, BMPs. We've got a couple of tanks thrown in there, destroyed, and all of the APCs, all 8 of them destroyed, or well, here we've got 1 recovered, and I don't know why that's listed here. Is interesting, and not seen him put that coloured background on here. So that's recovered. I presume that means a Russian APC was seen damaged and then recovered. So it has been taken out, but we know it has since been recovered. So it's still taken out for the time being. Then we have a whole host of trucks destroyed there, and civilian vehicles. My goodness, this is Bukanka side, and a number of motorcycles, ATVs. We have 5 Desert Cross 1000-3, the golf buggies, destroyed, another quad destroyed, and then all sorts of vehicles and motorcycles. It's just vehicle graveyard by the looks of it. So really significant losses for the Russians there. Nothing crazily high value, but it's going to be really affecting the that's in the wrong place. The Russian ability to, whether it be conduct logistics operations or, i.e. move troops, move supplies, or to conduct attacks, etc., etc. They can't keep losing equipment at these kinds of levels, but it appears that they do, as they still keep going with these same sort of tactics. Okay, with today's stats, it's much closer to parity. The combat asset losses are about equal. In fact, the Ukrainians may be losing one or two more there. The Russians are losing more civilian vehicles. As again, it's a really big loss of civilian type vehicles. Okay, let's look at the Ukrainian losses. We have a few bits of artillery. We have some tanks. One Leopard 2A4 damage. That's going to hurt a little bit. Another Marder captured. That's 2 captured in 2 days. Interesting. A few more infantry fighting vehicles, an APC there. Nothing too crazy. And some civilian vehicles and whatnot. Okay. Then when we go up to the Russian losses, nothing too valuable there either. Just the normal sort of howitzers, tanks, IFVs. All of them are destroyed or abandoned. So that's good news there. There's a captured Ural truck for the Ukrainians, i.e. they have captured out of the Russians. And the usual list of civilian vehicles, motorcycles, pickup trucks, cars, SUVs, so on and so forth. So, yeah, a couple of days of fairly substantial losses for the Russians if you add it all up. And neither side, though, losing really high value equipment, but that will hurt nonetheless. Okay, moving on to personnel discussions. We have actually I meant to pull this one in first. So this is, let's give you both sides of the story. This is what the Russians are claiming of Ukrainian losses in the Kursk region. So according to the Russian MOD, 11,000 Ukrainian soldiers have already been killed in Kursk. This is 1,000 less than the total contingent figure announced by Apti Alaudnov. So you've got the head of Akhmat saying that there are 12,000 Ukrainian soldiers in Kursk, and the Russian MOD then announcing that 11,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed. And then that you would assume, if that is true, then if the injured is working at a 3-to-1 ratio, then you've got 30,000 injured. And you then realise that the Russians are just talking bollocks again. Thus, there are no more Ukrainian soldiers left in Kursk. As this meme says, is Russia speaking? Yes, Russia is lying. Is Russia speaking? No, Russia is thinking of a lie. And then feeds back into, is Russia speaking? I think that's pretty accurate there. So that's the other side of the story. Russians claiming insane losses. Now let's look at a few anecdotes. And this one's a pretty interesting one. So Dmitry from War Translated says, interesting story from a Russian mobilized man titled Mistakes at War about the new battalion commander's decision to relocate mortars closer to infantry, which led to devastating losses from Ukrainian drones, resulting in more casualties in 3 weeks than in the previous 2.5 years, I presume just for that battalion. But that's incredible. The shortage of qualified personnel on the Russian side is real, says Dmitry. Okay, let's look at this claim in a bit more detail. So, not long ago, our battalion commander was replaced. The previous one, a cautious pre-war lieutenant colonel, was replaced by a 25-year-old senior lieutenant. The old commander had many issues, particularly with coordinating between units. There was barely any. He hoped things would improve, but it turned out things could get even worse. One of the first bold decisions by the new commander was to move the mortars closer to the infantry. At first glance, the advantages were obvious: increased accuracy, reduced flight time for the rounds, and ultimately more enemy losses. What could go wrong? The issue was the dominance of enemy drones, especially kamikaze drones. The mortar battery suffered its first loss while searching for new positions. A gunner from one of the crews was killed. He was 30 years old, mobilised, and hadn't had time to start a family. He often said he wouldn't return to the war after his leave, having grown tired in his second year, but he did come back. He and his platoon commander were moving through the trees looking for a new spot, a slow and difficult task. Nobody likes being near mortar crews. Of course, they were spotted. A kamikaze drone struck. And it didn't stop there. Another crew was hit while relocating. More losses. One soldier died and the commander lost a leg. Both were 25. The one who died was an anime fan didn't drink. They had signed contracts before the war instead of doing the usual 2 years of mandatory service. They'd been serving for 5 years. The real problem after moving positions was delivering 120mm mortar rounds. For those who don't know, each round weighs 16 kilograms, 35 pounds. A soldier in full gear can carry one round over several kilometers. A full trip for the crew equates 5 rounds, and to stay operational, they need 20 rounds daily. This kind of resupply is more manageable with 82mm mortars, where the rounds weigh 3.5 kilograms. For those, 2 runs a day are usually enough to keep going. The familiar Euro truck couldn't reach the new positions anymore, and the Chinese buggies frequently broke down due to harsh constant use. So a couple of interesting nuggets of information there. The crews found their own solutions. At first, one soldier got a dirt bike, but after 5 days it broke. He went to the nearest village for spare parts and was killed by a kamikaze drone on his way back. He was over 30, a new contract soldier who had joined in January 24. Another crew member bought a motorcycle in Donetsk while on a break from his position. He managed to deliver 60 rounds over 3 days. Then another drone hit and he suffered leg injuries, including a compound fracture. He was nearly 40, a volunteer who had served in the Second Chechen War and signed a 4-month contract in September 22, extended automatically. After that, they resorted to carrying rounds on foot, one at a time. This led to more losses, 3 dead within days. One of them was a platoon commander who had been scouting new positions with the gunner earlier. He was a pre-war contract soldier, careful and experienced, having served in Syria, Tajikistan and Armenia. He'd just been promoted to junior lieutenant last October during the second assault on Avdiivka. He and the gunner had knocked out a tank with his mortar. He wasn't even 30. The second casualty was another 30-year-old veteran with 2 small children, a native Bashkir, clever and resourceful. The third was another pre-war contract soldier, a university graduate, quiet but dutiful. The only consolation is that all the bodies were quickly recovered with their documents. We don't leave our own behind. I apologise for this requiem, but this was my battery. I served with them for over a year. 2 more were lightly wounded and sent to hospital, but stayed within the war zone. In just 3 weeks, the battery suffered more losses than in the previous 2.5 years. In effect, we lost 2 trained crews. So there you go. Interesting anecdote there from one battalion. Okay. The death toll in Poltava rises again after the large-scale Russian strike on September the 3rd that took out that training establishment for communications personnel. One person was injured in a rocket attack on the Institute of Communications, died in hospital, so that brings the number to 56, and I think I've heard it's actually 58 now. So 58 died, 328 injured. Those are huge injury numbers, of course. And the death numbers obviously just staggering there. So really shocking event that was for the Ukrainians. Russians are complaining about artillery charges that come from different sources and have different gunpowder weights, leading to much worse accuracy. So remember, yesterday Andrew Perpetua saying he's seen more multiple launch rockets hit that are duds than he's ever seen before. So interesting from him, and he gets to look at an awful lot of footage. Anyway, the quote here is, and briefly about my favourite artillery in September 2024, the dialogue was in my presence. Why can't you hit anything? Because we brought 10 shells from 6 different places. The powder weight distribution is different for every one. Each shell has its own shot calculation. So that's, even if there might be a natural variation in the shells that you know about, and so you have to calculate each different shell, or that you just don't know what the different makeup of the shells are, and there might be just unreliable shells in general, say from North Korea or whatever. Okay, Russian 9K332 Tor M2 surface-to-air missile system has been taken out, so that's important to keep degrading the Russian air defense capabilities. And then we look here, we're going to go and look at a few drone things. Now, these are the thermite dropping drones, these kind of dragon smaug, whatever you want to call them, dragonfire. Look at where they're being used. This is the Ukrainians knowing that they have a competitive advantage and trying their damnedest to make sure that they're getting used as much as possible before the Russians can catch up and do it themselves. So that's Kursk, that's north of Kharkiv, that's Kupiansk area, that is Kreminna area and the Serebyansky forest. We have the Seversk front line by Rozdilivka. We have Chasiv Yar and Klishchivka by the looks of it. We have the southern Pokrovsk area, Seledove or somewhere similar to that. We have Velika Novoselka, and we have Robotina as well. Goodness me, how sad that I know my Russian geography better than I do my English, my British geography. Anyway, there we go. That is pretty much everywhere along the front line. Very significant to note how much these are being used right now. They only started being used, we only saw the first bit of footage last week. Okay, and now we are seeing them have great success, and the Russians complaining quite widely about them. Right, the next bit of information is going to be concerning the Orion drone. That's a relatively new drone, rather like the Reaper drone that the Americans use, that is much larger and has rockets on board, like ATGMs. It can fire Vickr-1V laser-guided anti-tank missiles, and it can go 200 kilometers per hour at a maximum speed, but it cruises at 120 kilometers an hour, a range of 1,400 kilometers, and an endurance of 24 hours with a 60 kilogram payload. It can go up to 7,500 meters if needed. So that's a significant bit of drone there. Well, anyway, a rare instance of an Orion UCAV strike on a Ukrainian T-64 tank. So one of those drones here hitting a T-64. Russians claim the strike was carried out by a KH-BPLA guided missile being guided by the onboard laser. Orion UCAVs, along with Bayraktars, are rarely used as they are big and slow targets for a anti-air defense. So where we saw Bayraktars used quite widely at the beginning of the war, although I think a number of them were shot down more than was let on, they got this cult status, but the way that the Ukrainians thought hard about releasing the footage was clever. So that they took, I think, a bunch of footage really early on in the war of destroying lots of Russian vehicles, and then released that over time. So it looked like they were having sustained success with Bayraktars, and then they got loads of support, and Bayraktar was getting orders, and they were getting more of those drones in. Subsequently, anyway, it seems that they were quite vulnerable to air defense, and so they were pulled back and used much more in reconnaissance missions around the Black Sea, etc., etc. And these Orions, fairly similarly, are used sparingly because they are quite vulnerable to air defense. Well, it turns out it's not just anti-aircraft missiles and whatnot. So here is a Merlin, which is a similar sort of large drone and quite rare. So Ukrainian FPV interceptor drone hits a rare Russian Merlin VR reconnaissance drone. Ukrainian National Guard's Rubizh Brigade said it struck the Merlin in the Liman-Kupiansk sector, and some claims are that it was taken out by a special anti-aircraft FPV drone. Now, I don't know if there's any particular capabilities to those anti-aircraft drones, FPV drones, or whether they are just normal FPV drones that you use functionally to do this. But they are fairly similar to the ones you just attach explosives to and send into a trench. So I don't know, but it could be that these are particular anti-aircraft drones. And the claim here is that Ukrainian warriors have shot down a Russian drone at the altitude of over 3,600 meters for the first time. So that's 3.5 kilometers into the air. The drone was shot down by the Iron Brigade on September the 7th in the Kharkiv region. So this is a different one to the last footage I showed you. Our defenders noted the hunt was difficult due to the altitude of more than 3 kilometers and the drone's maneuvers. But again, it shows you how much the Ukrainians are now concentrating on taking out recon and similar larger drones. There is apparently a 3-step approach to doing this, so that they are, I almost shared it with you yesterday, they didn't really tell us too much information. I mean, the TLDR is that the Ukrainians are systematically trying to deal with these drones, which is brilliant. It comes like a year too late, but nonetheless, it's absolutely vital that the Ukrainians do continue doing this. Incredibly important to take out the Russian eyes in the sky. Now, moving on to Russia on fire, there's been a definite uptick in these incidents, says Tim White. Whether it's just a blip or a sign of sanctions or lack of maintenance or manpower remains to be seen. This is the Astro VAZ a vehicle plant in Togliatti. The blaze started in the metal working area. So this fire was fairly significant, according to media reports. The fire occurred in the metallurgical production facility, the moulding line, with an area of 50 square meters caught fire at the Astro VAZ plant in Togliatti. And then there's another blaze in Rostov. A furniture warehouse has gone up in flames tonight. Cause unknown. That's another furniture warehouse, not the first one that has gone up in fire. Now, in Kiev, there was a gas explosion at a logistics company in the Holosivsky district of Kiev, which killed at least 2 people, unfortunately, on September the 8th. That could have been that explosion, that smoke that I showed you. There was an explosion in Kiev, I think I reported yesterday morning, and it might well have been that. So possibly just a general gas explosion not connected to the war, or who knows. Right. In terms of distance strikes, last night, Ukraine shot down several missiles and drones, but it was a much quieter night than we've seen. Surely the Russians are going to be running out of these Shahed drones. They've been throwing them into Ukrainian airspace by the dozens and dozens every night now for about a week. So last night, that only 8 were flown into Ukraine seems about right to me. 6 of those were intercepted, were shot down, and then 2 fell independently due to electronic warfare, apparently. And 2 out of 3 cruise missiles were shot down, KH-59 or 69s, and then the other one didn't reach its target. So potentially, if we believe the Ukrainian claims, 100% of the ordnance thrown into Ukraine last night was intercepted in one way or another. Now, when we talk about missiles and drones, don't forget that there's always shelling taking place. Here's Nikopol, which was hammered yesterday, possibly last night. Nikopol's just the other side of the Zaporizhia reservoir. A 16-year-old girl died here. It's so sad to think, imagine, I think of my children. You spend all that time investing in your children and you're watching them grow up, and they're just getting to the cusp of adulthood where you can let them go. And then their lives are cut short, in this case, by indiscriminate shelling of Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. Just, it's terrible. Bloody bastards. So there you go. That's sad news coming from Nikopol there. But again, that's the sort of thing that happens every day up and down the front lines in different places. This is what Russia is doing to liberate Ukraine. They're liberating people of their lives. Just awful. Right, then this was news from yesterday. I don't think this happened in the evening attacks or the nighttime attacks from last night. I think this happened in the daytime. Latvia's President Edgars Rinkēvičs reports that a Russian military drone crashed in the eastern parts of Latvia. Now, it's worth knowing that Latvia's up there, Ukraine's down here. What is going on? Apparently, I think it came through Belarus. So this comes after a string of Russian drones and even missiles crossing and even crashing into NATO space, such as Poland and Romania. Yesterday, says no reports of Russian drone crashed in Latvia's Rezekne region. The Latvian Ministry of Defense reported that the drone, which entered Latvian airspace from Belarus, is under investigation to determine the exact circumstances of the incident. In Romania, they're looking for a Russian attack drone that flew there last night. A drone, as mentioned, also crashed into Latvia with an ongoing investigation. Poland is also looking for a drone that crashed recently too. So this is becoming a fairly regular occurrence in a number of different countries surrounding Ukraine. And yet those countries still haven't shot down any of these drones. A hangar in Belgorod went up in flames yesterday, says Tim White, after the latest exchange of fire in Russia's border region. The local governor says a drone hit a local business. Now, I don't know if this is the same fire that was also at here. A Russian fuel storage facility was on fire in Yatanovka in Belgorod. Quote, the AFU attacked a fuel storage site on the territory of Volokhonovsky district with the help of an unmanned aerial vehicle. As a result of the explosion, the tanks caught fire, says Belgrade governor. And looking at the photos, there are some talking about railway tanks, but I don't think it is. These are tanks, so this is a genuine depot. I think I was getting confused. Russian media report a drone attack on a fuel storage site in Belgorod, and that's only 25 kilometers, I think, from the border, so it's relatively close to Ukraine. That was on fire. And then warehouses were burning in Kerch and Crimea. Obviously some kind of strike last night there. Not really sure what took place. There might well be strikes that take place far more frequently than we understand, and that's probably the same for both Ukraine and Russia. We only hear about them if people release footage of them generally, and that doesn't always happen. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces. So Zelensky has appointed his speechwriter Dmytro Litvin and former Strategic Industries Minister Alexander Kamyshin as his new advisors as part of the major government reshuffle, according to presidential decrees published online. I was listening to Michael Clark, who often contributes to Sky News. He was being interviewed by Times Radio, and it made me realise that sometimes, we spend all this time researching and finding out stuff that actually, like, it's just as random people on the internet, we are ahead of the game. Because he is like saying, Kamyshin, his big worry about the government reshuffle is Kamyshin leaving his role as Strategic Industries Minister. And I was like, yeah, we know, though, that he's joining the presidential team as an advisor. And it seems that I really like Michael Clark, but he didn't seem to be unaware of that. Anyway, that's why you get your news from here, right? So he is joining the government, the Zelensky team much more closely. As a new advisor, part of the government reshuffle, according to the presidential decrees published online. In fact, Kamyshin himself has said, stepping into my new position, advisor to the president on strategic affairs, we'll keep working on building up our defense industry and a couple of other strategic areas upon the request of the president. So he is right in the mix. Michael Clark was saying he was worried about Kamyshin going because he's got such a good rep. He's achieved so much in both the railway job that he had before taking on the strategic minister job, and he's been very, very successful at both. So it'd be a shame to lose him, and it looks like he has actually had some kind of promotion here. Okay, Ukraine's new foreign minister Andriy Sybiha. So this is the guy who, or Sybiha, has replaced Dmytro Kuleba, who did a really good job over a very substantial period, has effectively stepped aside, thought that he's basically exhausted and wasn't achieving as much, possibly as a result of his exhaustion, wasn't achieving as much in terms of going around the world and securing weaponry and support from allied nations. So now his deputy is in that position. Ukraine's new foreign minister, Andriy Sybiha, has recalled Ukraine's chargé d'affaires to Georgia, Mikhailo Karyshin, with the wording, quote, due to his complete misunderstanding of the realities of the diplomacy of a warring state. Sybiha noted that the priority of Ukrainian diplomacy is weapons and other needs for the Ukrainian armed forces, and each ambassador should not wait for instructions from the centre, but take the initiative. Interesting there. About, it's almost like a NATO approach to giving you NCOs greater initiative and ability to make decisions themselves. Well, this is the same for ambassadors. Don't wait for a Soviet-style central decree. You need to go out there and do your stuff. And obviously the person working in Georgia was not doing that. Difficult place to work, Georgia, of course, with its present geopolitical situation. Okay, head of Ukrainian presidential administration speaks out about authorization to strike deep into Russia. And in response to the delivery of ballistic missiles to Russia, Ukraine should be allowed to destroy the warehouses with these missiles with Western weapons to avoid terror. Democracies must respond to the terror of autocracies. Strikes against terrorist Russia are defense, and defense is not escalation. Indeed, we saw Voronezh get hit the other day, which supposedly had KN-23 ballistic missiles delivered from North Korea. So that was arguably an example of that. Okay, Andrew Perpetua says the number of bombs Russia is dropping in Kursk is insanity. You see a bomb fall, drone zooms out, there are 5 more. Drone pans to the left, there are like 8 more. Pans to the right, like 12 more. And he quotes, quote, in the Kursk direction, the expletive, so this is a Ukrainian soldier saying this, or an officer, the expletive, so the Russians, have a completely different approach to counter battery. Their artillery is still not spread out in the direction, so they just F with carbs. Find the likely location of our artillery and throw carbs, and even more than one. Unfortunately, our stocks allow us to do this. They are getting really they are hammering the Ukrainians in Kursk with guided glide bombs. And there was one thought that this is coming from someone else, some random. In my opinion, CARBs, long-range PGMs, precision-guided munitions, these guided glide bombs have been key to Russia's success over the past year. That's without doubt true. If Andrew's observation is correct, it would explain why progress in Pokrovsk might be stalling. Russia's CARBs have likely been reprioritized to Kursk, and that's an interesting observation. So could it be that the Russian strategy of hammering Ukrainian front lines with these guided glide bombs is so prevalent that if they are panicking up in Kursk and having to redirect all their guided glide bombs up there, then in Pokrovsk, where they were being used quite widely, they're no longer being used as much and as effectively, and so that's led to a stalling of the Russian lines there. But on the other hand, the Ukrainians are also piling in some defensive troops into that area. So someone says somehow glide bomb outranges a Patriot battery. Pretty much do. The bombs have a range of around 70 kilometers. They are being dropped 10 to 15 kilometers deep into Russia, and the Patriots are probably 50 to 60 kilometers back from the front. So the planes are about 140 kilometers from the launcher, which means, because you won't have the launchers near where you got the target for the guided glide bombs. It's way too dangerous. So you have to put a Patriot launcher much further back, and the Russians will be able to hit the front lines without being hit by Patriots, and that is a huge challenge. In order for these planes to be shot down by the Patriots, you have to be really risky with those Patriots, and that's a very high risk, high reward. But my goodness, the risk might even outdo the reward. Well, it clearly does, because they're not doing that. Anyway, moving on. Alexander Syrsky, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, said in an interview with CNN that the Ukraine chose Kursk region for the offensive because it turned out to be the weakest area in the Russians' defense. This is one of the components I talked about in terms of why Kursk was really the only place they were going to attack. Well, it was going to be somewhere on the northern border, but Kursk was the eventual decision. Ukraine is doing everything possible not to lose Pokrovsk, and the Kursk operation helps in this, he says. In particular, it deprived the occupiers of the ability to maneuver their units. I mean, there are all these knock-on effects. Yeah, they didn't take troops from Pokrovsk so much to put them up into Kursk, but it's had effects everywhere else, and that might eventually affect Pokrovsk in some way. In fact, if we're talking about guided glide bombs being prioritized to Kursk, if that's the case, then there could be an example of how attacking into Kursk has helped Pokrovsk. Okay, there's a bit of panic on Russian channels, says Dmitry again. According to them, the Ukrainian armed forces have brought new reserves to Kursk to strengthen the second line of defense, and have also deployed engineering troops for a potential offensive. The accuracy of this statement cannot yet be verified, though. In addition, a well-known volunteer, Ghost of Novorossiya, announced the creation of a full-fledged branch in the Kursk region, saying that this is for a long time. Okay, so in the Kursk Oblast, says this source, two significant changes have occurred from the enemy's side from a tactical point of view. So this is from the Ukrainian side. This is a Russian saying about Ukrainians. The first units of the National Guard have been brought into the region, namely the 11th Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine, transferred from the Kherson direction. There are some these are the same mobile groups, drone operators and second line defense units. That is, the enemy is forming, deepening the defense and doing all this seriously. No one is going to leave anywhere. Apparently the issue of attracting other units of the National Guard of Ukraine will also be decided, many of which are currently not involved in combat operations and are carrying out positional service on the banks of the Dnipro. So this is broadly what I reported yesterday, and this is the original source. Also, the 49th Separate Engineering Assault Brigade, newly formed, has been brought into Kursk Oblast, whose tasks are to support primarily technical large-scale offensive actions, including in urban areas and when overcoming water obstacles. What this indicates is very easy to guess, and what he's basically saying is that the Ukrainians are not only pulling in troops to defend what they've already got, but also the ability to attack further using supporting engineering teams. And there's also a claim, so this one, War Monitor says, Russian forces continue to report with a degree of panic about Ukrainian forces moving elite brigades into the Kursk district. So the 47th Brigade, the 72nd Brigade, and Magyar's Birds, and the K2 battalion elements have been spotted. So some worry there from the Russians. Yet to see whether that translates into any more significant territory taken. Then there's an interesting video that came out and was subsequently deleted by the 13th. So the 13th is one of these mill bloggers we often dip into. You got two majors, 13th, people like Evil Gherkin before he's put into prison. So this guy, Russian propagandist 13, or the 13th, I think is the better translation, recorded a video that reminds us of the infamous Wagner head Prigozhin or Igor Strelkov, so Evil Gherkin. The video was deleted shortly after publishing it to avoid persecution for, quote, discrediting the Russian army. Quote, everything that is happening now is betrayal. Traitors are sitting in the Kremlin. So this is a right broadside against the Kremlin and against Putin directly from someone, very intimately involved in the war. If 10 years ago one man hadn't shit himself and, as they say, had gone F off honestly and not quietly 10 years ago, then all this expletive wouldn't have happened and so many guys wouldn't have died. But now you're locking us up and killing us, 13th said in his video address. We are a lot. We can reset the whole country. You are old, soon you will die. He's likely addressing Putin there, and of course that sounds quite revolutionary. Later the video was deleted by one of the admin on a Telegram channel with over 300,000 followers, and a voice message of apology was issued. Now, you may just think, yeah, whatever, but this is significant when you've got really key influencers within the Russian army sounding off like this. It is, we saw this with Prigozhin. That led to a mutiny. Prigozhin was killed, so on and so forth. But, this reflects that all is not well within the Russian armed forces. And then finally, just going to talk of this, which is that the Crimean bridge is gradually deteriorating due to damage from recent attacks, according to Atesh partisan group, who are based in Crimea. So you can see it's not looking good, this bridge. Structural degradation is occurring, and there's been a reduction in enemy air defense on the peninsula, making the bridge more vulnerable to further strikes. Interesting to see whether that is going to be, whether the bridge is going to be hit. There was talk about because they've built loads of booms and protection around the bridge in the water, there was the theory that actually with the upcoming storm season coming or whatever, that's likely to all be washed away, and it could present an opportunity for the Ukrainians to to use USVs, unmanned surface vehicles, drones, those Magura V5s, to attack. I don't know. Anyway, that's enough from me. Really appreciate your support. I was due to speak to Greg Terry today in a live stream, but I think we're going to have to reschedule it for tomorrow, just to let you know that he is out there right now with the Land Rover Snatch vehicles, the Medevac vehicles that we all fundraise for. Thank you so much for all of that. This is the fruit of our fundraising efforts.
Johnny, I'm going to have to move the stream later in the day, or we can reschedule and go for tomorrow. You can see I'm with the guys now with all the vehicles, and some of the projects we're doing is taking longer than I expected. So you can see your labors here, man. 4 of these bad boys. So 4 o'clock my time going to be very difficult.
So he's going to sort some stuff out with the vehicles, so we can't do that today, and it's looking like we'll do a live co-stream tomorrow to get a catch-up on exactly what he's been up to. It's been a very long time since we've hung out together, so that'll be really good news, hopefully, and good to speak to him, and you guys can come along, join in the conversation, and we can find out about all of the details concerning those vehicles, and that is, of course, as a result of you guys fundraising as well as you did previously. So fantastic stuff. So look out for that one. Anyway, in the meantime, guys, take care. Speak soon.